The first sign was not the tree falling. It was the cold air coming out of it. I found it on a gray October morning in 2008, while I was walking the south fence of our farm outside Monroeville, Indiana. The soybeans were already cut, the corn was still standing, and the whole place had that empty sound a farm gets when harvest starts moving toward winter. The maple stood at the bend of the lane, halfway between my barn and the old Kincaid grain elevator. My grandfather planted it in 1931, the same year he bought the first 80 acres from a bank that had no patience left for farmers. It had a trunk wide enough that two men could not reach around it. Every kid in my family had learned to climb on its lowest limb. But that morning, the south side of the trunk had split open. Not a lightning scar, not a rotten hollow. A clean vertical crack, 3 fingers wide, running from my belt buckle up into the branches. The bark had peeled back in 2 dark lips, and when I put my hand near the opening, I felt a draft. Cold. Not autumn cold, cellar cold. I leaned closer and smelled iron. I should have called an arborist. Instead, I called Elias Reed. Elias was 84, lived 2 farms over, and had known my grandfather better than I ever did. He came up the lane in his old blue pickup, stepped out with his cap pulled low, and stood in front of that maple without saying a word. Then he took off one glove and ran his fingers along the split. "Well," he said, "looks like Henry's gate finally opened." I asked him what that meant. Elias looked toward the grain elevator. The Kincaid trucks were already lined up by the scales, engines idling, drivers drinking coffee like they owned the road. "Your granddad bought something from Abner Kincaid that nobody understood," Elias said. "A scrap of dirt, less than a horse stall. Folks laughed at him for paying legal fees on land you couldn't even plant." He tapped the cracked trunk with 2 fingers. But Henry said a day would come when a small gate mattered more than a big field. I did not sleep much that night. For 6 months, Ross Kincaid had been making my life smaller. Ross owned the grain elevator now. His grandfather had started it. His father had expanded it. Ross had turned it into a regional feed and seed operation with polished trucks, bright signs, and lawyers who used words like development corridor when they meant your fence was in their way. He wanted a wider commercial entrance off County Road 6. The county wanted the drainage fixed. The engineers wanted the Old South Lane closed while they replaced a culvert and buried a new water line. Everyone told me it was temporary. Temporary meant my cattle trucks had no clean way in. Temporary meant my fuel delivery had to back half a mile down a gravel lane. Temporary meant Ross's semi sat against my fence every morning, vibrating the wire loose, while his drivers treated my field approach like a waiting room. When I complained, Ross laughed in front of 3 county supervisors. "Cal," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "you don't own the road. And you sure don't own progress." Then he offered to buy my South 40 for less than it was worth before his own project trapped it. So when Elias said my grandfather had buried a gate under that maple, I was already listening. The next morning, I dug. I worked by hand because the roots were thick and I was afraid of breaking whatever was down there. About 2 feet below the split, my spade hit metal with a sound that went through my wrists. It was not a treasure chest. It was a galvanized survey tube, capped at both ends and sealed with black tar so old it had gone hard as coal. Roots had grown around it like fingers. I had to cut 2 of them with a pruning saw before the tube came loose. Elias stood behind me the whole time, quiet as church. We carried it to my barn and set it on the workbench under the buzzing fluorescent light. I scraped the tar away with a putty knife. The cap turned once, then stuck. I clamped the tube in a vise, put both hands on a pipe wrench, and leaned my weight into it. The cap broke free with a pop that sounded too loud in the barn. Inside was a roll of oilcloth tied with butcher string. Inside the oilcloth were three things: a warranty deed, a hand-drawn plat, and 2 pages torn from my grandfather's ledger. No cash, no gold, no hidden diamonds. Just paper. But the deed had my grandfather's name on it, Henry Joseph Mercer. And under the property description was a line I read 4 times before I understood it. Parcel B-17. A strip of ground 6 feet wide and 24 feet long, lying between County Road 6 and the entrance apron of the Kincaid grain scale. I looked at Elias. He nodded toward the elevator. "That's the throat," he said. "Every loaded truck they weigh crosses that strip." I drove to the courthouse that same afternoon. The clerk was a woman named Denise Harmon. She had worked in the recorder's office since the Reagan years and had the kind of patience that comes from watching families argue over fence lines for half a lifetime. She unfolded the deed under a green desk lamp and stopped talking. Then she pulled the old plat books, then the tax cards, then the scanned index that everyone trusts until it has to answer for something written before computers. An hour later, Denise pushed her glasses up and said, "Mr. Mercer, this parcel still exists." I asked who owned it. She tapped the deed. "You do." The Kincaid elevator owned the land behind it. The county owned the road in front of it, but between the pavement and the scale approach sat 6 feet of Mercer ground, small enough to miss on a modern map and important enough to stop a business that moved 30 trucks a day. There was no recorded easement, no right-of-way agreement, no sale, just my grandfather's deed, filed on March 2, 1954, and a line on the plat that every newer survey had quietly drawn around. Denise lowered her voice. "You need a lawyer before you wave this around." So I got one. His name was Peter Lang, a property attorney in Fort Wayne who wore suspenders and looked like he had been born annoyed. He studied the deed, the plat, and the ledger pages while I sat across from his desk, trying not to stare at the billable clock. The first ledger page was dated March 5, 1954. Sold Abner continued use across the scale strip as neighborly permission only. He is to keep South Lane graveled, never block my gate, never claim ownership. No paper beyond deed, his word and mine. The second page was from 1978, in my father's handwriting. Kincaid trucks still crossing B-17. Permission follows conduct, not blood. If they block our lane, permission ends. Peter read that line twice. Then he smiled for the first time. "That," he said, "is not an easement. That is a license." I did not know the difference. He explained it simply. An easement is a recorded right that can outlive the people who made it. A license is permission, and permission can be revoked, especially when the other side violates the terms everyone lived under. Ross Kincaid had spent months telling me I was in the way of progress, but the only legal throat into his scale was permission my family had never been paid for, never sold, and never surrendered. Peter sent the first letter by certified mail. It said Kincaid Feed and Seed had 10 days to stop using Parcel B-17 unless Ross restored my South Lane access, moved his staging trucks off my fence, and signed a written crossing agreement that recognized Mercer ownership. Ross called me before the mail carrier had made it back to town. "You think a piece of yellow paper beats 70 years of trucks?" he said. I told him I thought recorded land records beat a loud voice. He laughed. "Try it, Cal." So I did. The surveyor came on a Monday morning with 2 assistants, a tripod, a stack of old plats, and no interest in Ross's temper. They set orange stakes along both sides of parcel B-17. 6 feet did not look like much, until you saw it measured across the elevator entrance. It cut the driveway like a belt. Ross came out of his office in a fleece vest and clean boots. He watched the stakes go in. His drivers watched him watching. The county engineer pulled up 5 minutes later, and for once, he did not look eager to speak. Ross pointed at the surveyor. "Those stakes are wrong." The surveyor did not look up. "They are where the deed says they are." Ross turned to me. "You block my scale during harvest, I'll bury you." That was the darkest moment of the whole thing, because part of me believed him. Ross had money. He had contracts. He had friends on boards and committees. I had a farm with old equipment, a line of credit, and a wife in a cemetery who used to handle the paperwork because she knew I hated offices. I went home that night and sat at the kitchen table with my grandfather's ledger open under the light. His handwriting was small and square, the kind men used when paper was not cheap. Permission follows conduct, not blood. I read it until the words stopped looking like ink and started looking like a hand on my shoulder. 2 days later, Ross's crew parked 3 semis along my fence before sunrise. Not accidentally. One of them blocked my fuel truck. Another left ruts in the grass, shoulder deep enough to catch rain for a week. At 9 o'clock, Peter Lang filed the notice of revocation. At 9:30, I drove the old Massey Ferguson to parcel B-17 and parked it squarely on my side of the stakes. Not on the county road, not on Kincaid land, on mine. I shut off the engine, climbed down, and laid the deed in a clear plastic sleeve on the seat. By 10, the first loaded truck had nowhere to go. By 10:15, Ross was standing in the road yelling into his phone. By 11, the sheriff arrived. He was a careful man named Nolan Pike. He read the deed. He read the survey stake tags. He read Peter's filed notice on his tablet. Then he looked at Ross. "This is civil," he said. Ross's face went red. "I'm losing $10,000 an hour." Sheriff Pike nodded toward my tractor. "Then I'd suggest you stop making it expensive." That afternoon, Ross brought his lawyer. By 4 o'clock, nobody was yelling anymore. That is how you know paper has started working. The next week was not dramatic. It was better than dramatic. It was procedural. Ross's lawyer searched the records and found no easement. The county checked its right-of-way maps and found no claim to parcel B-17. Peter produced the ledger pages and the old tax receipts, showing my family had paid on that little strip for more than 50 years, even when the amount was too small for anyone to notice. The thing Ross had treated like empty ground had a chain of title. The thing he had treated like a habit had terms. And the thing he had treated like weakness had a signature on it. By Friday, Ross signed. He restored my south lane with crushed limestone, paid to repair the fence line his trucks had chewed up, and moved his construction staging to his own lot. He signed a 5-year crossing agreement for parcel B-17, renewable only if my gate stayed clear and my access remained open. The fee was not huge by corporate standards, but on a family farm, $12,000 a year is not small. I used the first check to do what Ross had insisted could not be done. I hired a grading crew to cut a narrow back lane along the old hedgerow and tie it into the township road east of my pasture. I paid the water company to run a separate service line along that route. I had the surveyor record every inch of it. No handshake, no memory. No, we've always done it this way. Words filed where words could be found. The work took 26 days. On the last morning, I stood in my kitchen and opened the faucet. It coughed air twice, spat brown, then ran clear. Cold water in a white sink. I stood there longer than a man should stand at a sink. Ross never apologized. Men like Ross do not apologize when the world proves them wrong. They call it a misunderstanding, a legacy issue, an unfortunate paperwork gap. By spring, he had sold a minority share of the elevator to a company out of Ohio. By the next harvest, his name was off the sign. The maple did not survive the winter. We cut it in February after the crack spread halfway through the trunk. I kept one round from the base and had it planed flat. You can still see where the tree grew around the old survey tube, year by year, closing itself over a secret that was not treasure at all. It was a gate. That is what I understand now. My grandfather did not bury money because money can be spent. He did not bury revenge because revenge rots faster than wood. He buried proof. A deed, a plat, 2 ledger pages, a paper gate so small nobody saw it, until a powerful man put his whole weight against it. I am 71 now. I still farm less than I used to, and more than my doctor recommends. I still walk the south fence when the air turns cold. The elevator lights still come on before dawn, and the trucks still cross that little strip, because now they pay to cross it. Every time they do, I think about my grandfather planting a maple over a tube of paper and waiting for the future to grow around it. Some gates are made of steel, some are made of wood. The strongest one I ever owned was 6 feet wide, 24 feet long, and written down before I was born.